Hi everyone, so today we're going to do a second version of the tutorial that I did before for the face mask. This one is still using the same Craft Passion pattern, but a slight modification to the construction. You'll see online on her website that she mentions a second way to do it that has a pocket. I'm also further modifying those instructions because we've had a lot of issues with getting elastic to people and just not having elastic available. So if you don't have elastic available, we are going to do ties. Okay, now you could use ribbon, twill tape, some other kind of thing. You could take pre-made bias tape and fold it in half and stitch it and use that for a tie. In the video, I'm going to go over just making ties completely from scratch with fabric so that if all you have is fabric and thread, you can still do it. It's a little more time consuming, but it's still possible. And then you'll get something like this. Now, this mask, the difference is it's going to actually have a pocket along the side here on both sides so that you can slip either another face mask inside of there, like a medical face mask inside of there, or you could put, some people have been putting furnace filters. They've been taking furnace filters apart and using that material from the furnace and from the filter and putting that inside. So if you have an additional layer, I mean, I've heard of people using coffee filters. I'm not really sure what, we haven't tested out to see what the best option is, but you could try different things and see what works for you. But using coffee filter or using non-woven interfacing inside, in any case, you have this option now to remove that thing while you wash this. The other thing you might want to add to this, if you have this around or are able to get your hand on it, a lot of people have been doing wire along the top of the face mask to help fit it over the top of the nose. So this mask style will allow for that if you choose to do that, and I'll mention that later. But you would just have to do a second channel of stitching along the top so that you have a little kind of tunnel that you can pass it through, and then you would stitch along the sides to tack it so that it doesn't come out. So again, you'd almost make like a little box at the top here. So if you made a second row of stitching along the top for a little bit and then went inside through the pocket opening, put the wire inside, and then make little tacks along the side here to secure it in place. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is to cut out our outer fabric. This is a repeat of the other mask tutorial, so if you've already watched that one, you don't need to watch this one again. We're going to do the same thing for the outer fabric and add a 1-inch seam allowance along the straight edge over here, and then add a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the other edges. So I'm just lining up the 1/4 inch mark on my ruler and bumping out the line by a 1/4 inch. Okay, so and if you prefer to do a larger seam allowance, again, you can do that. So we have a 1-inch seam allowance on this side and then a 1/4 inch on the other sides, but you could do a 1/2 inch on the other sides if you prefer that. This just uses less fabric this way. Okay, then we'll go ahead and cut that out. Okay, then we're going to repeat that same process on the lining fabric, only for the lining fabric we will not add that 1-inch extra seam allowance on the side. Okay, so we'll do 1/4 of an inch on these 3 sides and no seam allowance on the straight edge over here. Okay, so we have the seam allowance on 3 sides, but nothing added on this side over here. Now the only thing that we're going to need to cut besides those pieces this time is we're going to cut ties. Okay, so what's been happening is that we seem to have a shortage of elastic. Some people might have elastic, and then you could follow the same kind of method we've been doing with the elastic. But if you have either extra fabric, you can make ties, or you could use bias tape and fold it in half and stitch it, and that could become a tie. You could use a ribbon for a tie. So there's lots of options. I'm going to go with people having nothing, and if you had to make ties, I'll show you how to make the tie. So I'm going to go with 1 1/4 inch wide strips. Okay, so we're going to cut those out. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and press these strips to make our ties. Okay, so for each of these ties, what we're going to do is we are going to fold it to get all those raw edges finished. So if you fold it in half, you'll get a crease down the center. And you just want to line up your raw edges and fold it in half. Okay, then when you open it up, you have that crease in the center. We're going to take those edges and fold them into the crease so they meet in the middle like that. And then it gets folded in half again, so that all the edges are finished. You might hear my kids in the background while I'm doing this. Turn off that steam. There we go. Now you could use a bias tape maker tool if you have one handy. I don't have one with me at home. Okay, and then we'll just fold that in half again. Okay, so then all the edges are finished like that. It's all closed up like that. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna wanna stitch this along this edge over here, the edge that is open. We're gonna stitch close to the edge there. Okay, so once you have those ties pressed, you're gonna go ahead and stitch along that closer to the open edge of the tie. And we can start with a few stitches and backstitch. Backstitch at the end. Okay, and then you're going to repeat that process to all 4 ties. Next, we're going to sew that front curved edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've moved my needle over to be 1/4 inch from the edge of the presser foot, so I can just sew along the edge of the presser foot here. Backstitch. Just follow along the curve. Backstitch at the end there. Okay, and you're going to repeat that same process to your outer fabric as well. Okay, so once you have that seam sewn, you're going to want to press it flat in one direction. So I'm going to take the mask and put it on the board here like this, and then take the iron and press inward towards the seam. Now, at my studio, I would use a pressing tool, like a tailor's ham or a seam roll to help me press it, but this works just fine, just kind of going in at the seam with using the tip of the iron like that. Okay, and that just gives us a nice flat seam, everything pushed in one direction. So we're going to repeat that with the other fabric. Okay, so once you have those seams pressed, you'll notice here what I did is I made sure that when they get sewn together, I have one seam going one direction and one going the other direction, and that just makes it lay a little more flat, so it's easier to sew it together. So what we're going to do before we sew them together is we're going to run a little top stitch along this edge just to help keep this laying flat once it's all done. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little edge stitch here next to the seam. And it's kind of like a cup kind of shape here that we have to kind of get out of the way as we're sewing it. Now, if you skip this part, it would not be the end of the world, but it will just help it to lay flat, which I think also with having it have this version has a pocket where you can insert a mask inside, so or a filter inside, and I think this, you know, being flat will just make it a little bit easier to get the other layer inside. Okay, and we're going to repeat that on our lining fabric. After you've done your top stitch, you're going to take your lining fabric, and along that straight edge, we're going to do a double 1/4 inch turn hem. So we're going to fold it 1/4 inch towards the wrong side, press that, and then another 1/4 inch fold. Okay, and we're going to repeat that on the other side before stitching that down. So just like that towards the wrong side. Okay, so once you have that hem pressed, you're going to go ahead and sew along this inner edge over here. So I've already done this side. You can see where the stitches end up along this edge right here, okay? And that's just to hold that hem down in place. So we're going to line up so that we are sewing along the inner edge and then just stitch it down in place. Okay, once you've stitched your hems along the side, we're going to go ahead and sew the bottom edge and the top edge together. So you want to start at the seam in the center and line up your seams so that they match each other. Okay, so we just have like this, and we bring them together. Let's see, get those seams together, and then pin it there. And you'll notice that you have extra fabric hanging off the side here, which is correct. Okay, so we're going to stitch along that bottom edge first. Okay, so before you flip these around, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take these curved sections like this and just do a few snips into the edge of the fabric to release that curve so it lays better when it flips around. So we don't want to cut the stitching, but just a few snips there. We're going to do it at the bottom as well. Okay, and then you can reach in through the end and flip this right side out. Okay, and then we're going to head over to the iron next to do some pressing. Okay, so I've taken this edge here. You can see where the edges automatically kind of fold in from having been sewn, the seam allowance there. So we're going to go ahead and just give that a press. And then continue to press along the edge of the fabric. So when you press it, you just want to make sure that that seam comes all the way out and is flush like that. Okay, we don't want it folded here and have the edge tucked inside like that. We want to make sure that's pushed all the way out from underneath. So you can put your hand inside and kind of push out the seam. And then once you have it pushed all the way out, you can press it from the outside here. Okay, and just continue that all the way around the outside. Okay, so once you have that nice and pressed, you're going to go ahead and run a top stitch along the top and bottom edges. This will just make it a little more durable through all the washings. And when you get to right about here where that seam is, the hem, just be aware that it's there. You might need to push your fabric a little bit so it doesn't get caught up on that. Okay, next we're going to take that outer layer and we're going to make a hem on the outer layer. So first we're going to fold it a 1/4 inch fold along the edge towards the lining side. And then you're going to fold it again so that the fold meets up with the lining fabric. Okay, so like this, so that they meet each other there in the middle. And you can press it like that. And then just repeat that on the other side. Okay, then what we want to do is we want to take our ties that we made and we're going to insert them behind this hem here. Okay, so we have this hemmed edge. We're going to put it inside and then wrap it around it. So it's like this. You could actually even put it underneath that first 1/4 inch turn, like that, and then fold it back like that. Okay, and you can repeat that for the other corners that you have left to do. Okay, once you have those ties pinned in place here like this, we're going to sew across the ends of each tie and also along the hemmed edge here. And you do want to make sure that when you sew across the ends where the tie is, that you give it a good back and forth a few times to make sure it's nice and secure. And it is pretty thick there, so just be aware on your home machine if you have any trouble going through it to help move it along so it doesn't get stuck. Okay, and then you're going to just repeat that on the other side. Okay, so the nice thing about this version is that we have created a pocket here on the side that is all clean finished on both edges, so it should withstand washings. And through this opening, you could insert another layer. You could put a filter from a furnace. People have been cutting down filters to put inside. I've heard of some other things that have been used that you might want to remove while you are washing it. You can also just put another face mask to be placed inside of this. So let's give it a try. Now, some people have also been inserting wire into these masks, and this would certainly be easy enough to do with this particular mask. What you could do is you could sew along the top here a channel, so you could do an extra row of stitching along the top, and then you would insert the wire from the side, and then you would just do tacking by stitching down along the sides to keep that wire inside there.